everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today's video is on Camp Grant and the little girl lost. The Camp Grant Museum and Command Post Restaurant is a treasure trove of interesting history told through actual artifacts of the men and women who served at Camp Grant. It is owned by Stanley and Yolanda Weisensel. They have spent many years scouring the area on a quest to build a memorial to the people who traveled through this area on their way to serve our country in World Wars I and II. The place is fascinating enough on its own, but the Weisensels are gems themselves. Yolanda is quite a storyteller and has spent many hours researching the whole area that once was Camp Grant. The construction for Camp Grant began in July of 1917, and by November of that year, 1,100 buildings had been constructed. It was designed to be a training site for infantry, engineers, machine gunners, and artillery. Both enlisted men and officers were trained there. It was virtually a small city and even had its own fire department and police force. It also included a base hospital, a photography studio, a movie theater, and a parade ground. It totaled over 5,000 acres. In its peak time, July 1918, Camp Grant supported a total of 50,543 officers and enlisted men. The fall of 1918 brought a new commandment to Camp Grant. Colonel Charles B. Hagedorn had almost a spotless career in the armed services. He graduated from West Point on June 14, 1889, and returned as a drawing instructor. Hagedorn also served in Manila. It was here that, according to the newspapers, Charles experienced bitter fighting. The only spot in his respectable career was when Hagedorn was assigned to the position as a military attaché in Petrograd, Russia. Charles requested a transfer from the position in 1914, citing health issues. The government denied his request, and Charles left anyway, stating later that he needed medical care that was not available in Manila. Charles Hagedorn was mildly disciplined after his return, and soon the incident was forgotten. Hagedorn became the commandant of Camp Grant in September 1918. Shortly after the new commandant arrived in the fall of 1918, the devastating Spanish flu hit the Rockford area. This was a worldwide epidemic that killed millions. Hundreds of thousands of people died in the United States, and Rockford was hit very hard. The supposed cause of the massive spreading of this disease was the soldiers themselves. Looking back, it is no surprise that Camp Grant, with so many men in such close quarters, was devastated by the aggressive onslaught of the influenza. The first case was reported on September 23, 1918. 3 days later, there were over 700 cases reported, and by the end of the month, over 4,000 cases were reported. Not much could be done to help the patients who came down with this dreaded disease. It swept quickly through the camp, and there were some 24-hour periods when over 100 men died. Within 9 days, 1,000 men had perished, and within 2 weeks the number had swelled to over 2,000 dead. By early October, Colonel Hagedorn was showing signs of the stress from the massive loss of his men. He had suffered from insomnia for years, but at this time it became severe. Other officers who shared a house with him stated later that they heard him pacing and talking to himself at all hours of the night. On October 7, 1918, Hagedorn was heard to say, "My God, but these deaths were appalling." The next morning, Colonel Hagedorn was found dead in his bed. Though all the soldiers were told that it was nervous exhaustion from the strain of all the deaths at the camp, the newspapers from all over the country stated the truth. Charles Hagedorn had shot himself in the head. There were some people who speculated, however, that maybe it was not suicide at all. This was explored in a fictional book written by Carl Brown titled No Taps for Charlie. Brown apparently thought that Colonel Hagedorn was murdered, though his theory has never been proven. Within days of Colonel Hagedorn's death, the influenza outbreak began to slow, and by the end of October it was considered to be controlled by the camp. According to psychics Sarah Boker and Paul Smith, Colonel Hagedorn is one of the remaining spirits at the camp. His presence is very strong in every part of that building, and therefore it is not surprising that he had been seen and heard by visitors. Both Sarah and Paul think that he is still there trying to protect what he considers to be his boys. They also state that he has a fondness for Yolanda and Stanley. They have told the soldiers stories and ensured that these men would not be forgotten. After the war, the camp was used for a variety of purposes, including a temporary training facility for the Illinois National Guard. The camp was reopened for World War II and in August 1943 began to house German POWs, most of whom were members of the German Afrika Korps or U-boat sailors. These men were paid to work in the nearby fields and canneries to help ease a shortage of men in the local area. Later, many of these prisoners would claim that they were treated very well at the camp. Some of them were drawn back to this area to live after the war. Besides being filled with interesting artifacts, the museum also has many spirits that linger within its walls. The owners and waitstaff have had many experiences that they cannot explain. They have had items moved around, seen moving balls of light, felt someone touch them, and seen full-bodied apparitions. Right from the beginning, Yolanda knew there was something different about this place. She would set the tables up for the day shift each night before leaving. Upon their return in the morning, the place settings would be moved all around. Sometimes it would be all the salt shakers, and the next it might be all the silverware. There was no rhyme or reason to it. It just seemed like something or someone was trying to get her attention. One waitstaff was standing at the wait station before opening one morning and noticed some movement out of the corner of her eye. She froze and slowly turned her head. She could see a soldier standing an estimated 6 feet away from her. He was in uniform and he appeared solid. As she turned her head farther to look at him fully, he disappeared. There was another occasion when Yolanda's daughter Toni was at the restaurant after hours with a gentleman who was working on the computer. He needed to take a break to use the restroom, which was in the main part of the dining area. He was returning to the office area when he saw a rather large man with an apron step through a doorway from one of the exhibits rooms. The man, who was very solid, looked toward the computer man and scowled, as though he was not happy to see him. The computer man returned to the office and asked Toni about who else might be in the building at that time of night. When Toni assured him that they were alone in the building, he shared what he saw with her. They left the building shortly after that. Yolanda has had other experiences in the diner. Once, she was finishing up for the night and was leaning over her office chair typing on the computer when she felt a nudge on her shoulder. She assumed it was Stanley, letting her know he was ready to go. When she turned to speak to him, there was no one there. She went into the dining room and found Stanley sitting at one of the tables. When she asked him if he was just in the office, he stated that he had been at the table the whole time. Even with earlier experiences, Yolanda was not convinced that the place might be haunted. But that all changed one evening. She was standing in the dining area talking to someone when she turned to look down the hallway past the bathrooms. Yolanda was astonished to see a young man dressed in a white apron run across the hallway from the Rockford room. He was laughing and turned to look over his shoulder as if someone was chasing him. He seemed to be having a good time, Yolanda stated later. The staff hear news stories on almost a daily basis from families whose loved ones served at the camp or were held there as POWs during World War II. Yolanda received letters, photographs, and other artifacts. Once she even received a placemat from the first Thanksgiving dinner served there. Yolanda and Stanley have worked very hard to ensure that this little piece of Rockford's history is not forgotten through the stories they share and the mementos and photographs they have collected. Psychics who have visited the place all feel that this was not gone unnoticed by the spirits that linger in this place. It seems to work almost as a ghost magnet, and they appear drawn to that place. Perhaps they are waiting to have their stories told. All the psychics agree that the spirits are grateful to Yolanda and Stanley for honoring their memories. Yolanda is very comfortable with the idea of the spirits staying around as long as they stay at the restaurant. I always say goodnight when I leave. I also tell them they can't come home with me. You stay here, says Yolanda. So that was the first story. And if you remember in my last video, I stated that these two stories were like in the same vicinity. So I'm going to start with this story. The story is called Little Girl Lost. There is a warehouse on the southeast side of Rockford that has an unusual problem. The problem isn't with wiring or plumbing. This warehouse has a ghost. Actually, it has a couple of them. But the most disturbing one is the ghost of a little girl. No one can remember when they started hearing stories about this little girl, but all agree it has been years. The little girl is seen all over the area, but mainly near the intersection of Samuelson Road and 6th Street. Yolanda Weisensell, owner of Command Post Restaurant and Camp Grant Museum, states that she has heard quite a bit about the child. The little girl is described as being between 5 to 8 years old, with long, light brown hair, and she wears a dress with stockings and boots. She seems to be from the 1910s to 1920s era. I have heard several stories. Someone told me they can remember a little girl who got hit by a train back when the train tracks ran down 6th Street, Weisensell states. There is one person who is reluctant to talk about the little girl, however. He works in the previously mentioned warehouse, and we will call him Sam. I was moving some pipes in the warehouse. I would bend over and pick up a pipe and move it to its new location, explained Sam. There is a door that has a window set in the top half, right across from where Sam was working. And what he saw in the reflection of the window startled him so much that he no longer likes to be in the warehouse at night by himself. When Sam stood up with a pipe, he caught his reflection in the glass of the door. He had seen that same window at least a dozen times, but this time something was different. When Sam looked into the glass, he saw more than his own reflection. Standing next to him was the reflection of a little girl. She was about 6 or 7 years old, had light brown hair, and was wearing a dress. Even more alarming to Sam, the girl reached out for his hand, and just as he saw the little girl's hand touch his whole right arm went cold. Sam quickly looked next to him. There was no one there. Sam turned to look back into the window, and the little girl was still there. Sam is not a man to frighten easily. He's a large man, 6 feet, 3 inches or so, and probably 230 pounds. But he shared with me that he is Samoan, and his Pacific Island people are very superstitious about the dead. The Pacific people believe that objects that reflect one's image are a portal to the spirit realm. To steal the souls of the living, evil spirits sometimes take on the appearance of loved ones who have passed away. While others might have been curious and even possibly thrilled that the little girl had contacted them, Sam was not. He does not want to be disrespectful toward the little girl, but he really doesn't ever want to see her again. Other people have seen the same little girl outside the building, skipping along both 6th Street and Samuelson roads, and picking the wildflowers that grow up along the roadside. They claim that she is just as solid as any other living little girl. The only thing odd about her is she is dressed in clothes from another time. Despite research into the train accidents in that particular area and reviewing news reports on a child who died at that intersection, I have been unable to find the little girl's identity. She remains as elusive as her reason for lingering here. Thank you for watching today's video. If you liked the video, please give me a thumbs up, and if you would like to see more videos like this, please subscribe. What paranormal or crime-related mystery would you like to see next? I hope you all have a great day.